centuries. Is it just metaphor? Is it just poetry? Or is there an inner wisdom here that merits the attention of modern science?
It's a controversial theory, and many cardiologists and neurologists are skeptical.
I'm very skeptical because I know that this organ cannot generate ideas or memory in the sense we know.
Basically, from a surgeon's point of view, the heart is first and foremost, and perhaps last also, a pump.
So is our heart just an organ to pump blood, or could it be much more? The first patient to report a change in personality was Claire Sylvia from Boston in the United States. 20 years ago, she was the first person at New Haven Hospital to receive a heart and lung transplant. The operation was a success.
It was very weird to see my heart on the machine, giving me the beat and hearing it. It was a whole new rhythm, a whole new feeling, and little did I know that my journey was just beginning. It was a couple of days after the surgery that the press came in to interview me, and one of the reporters asked, now that you've had this miracle, what do you want more than anything in the world? And I said, I'd die for a beer right now. It just came from me, and I'm not a beer drinker. And I was a little mortified by my flippant answer to such a profound question. So that was my first happening. And little by little, many things started happening till I was really feeling convinced that I was living with the presence of another within me.
We must travel on, la, 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 la.
The first thing that happened were the food preference changes. Suddenly, like green peppers, finding them, putting them in my food, I used to take them out. And the first time they allowed me to drive, I found myself going to a Kentucky Fried Chicken place to buy chicken nuggets, something I never did before. I found that my handwriting, instead of going from right to left, it was going from left to right. And these things were sneaking up on me, little by little.
Like most heart transplant recipients, no detail was revealed to Claire about her donor. All she was told was that her heart had come from a young man who had died in a motorcycle accident.
It wasn't until a few months after the transplant that I had a dream in which I'm with a young man. I awakened from the dream feeling that this for certain was my donor. And in the dream, his name, I knew him as Tim L. So I called the transplant coordinator, told her about the dream, and asked her if that was his name. Well, there was a moment of silence, and she said, please don't pursue this.
Remarkably, the donor's name was Tim Lamarand. What's more, he loved beer and green peppers. Chicken nuggets were found in his motorcycle jacket when he died. It was only when she finally met her donor family that she pieced everything together, giving her confirmation that everything she was experiencing had extraordinary similarities to her donor.
The family of my heart verified all the experience I was having, and they were hungry to get anything they could from me about Tim that I was remembering from his memories that were coming through me.
Claire was the first case to appear in the public eye. The memories and changes were uncannily like her donor. With strict codes of confidentiality in place at the hospital, it was impossible for Claire to have known these details about her donor. So where could these memories have come from? Professor Paul Pearsall is a cardioneurologist from the University of Honolulu. He first encountered stories like Claire's whilst recovering in hospital from a bone marrow transplant.
I had a bone marrow transplant for stage 4 cancer in the very early 80s. And I was on the transplant unit, and we would sit down at night, all of us who were dying, and most of us were, and talk about things. And the heart transplant recipients were reporting receiving the memories, feelings, food preferences, fears, musical preferences of their donor. One woman who got the heart of a boxer was the most quiet, demure, easygoing woman, hated violence, left the room when her husband would watch football. She's got this heart of the boxer, now she watches football and yells and swears and punches and everything. So that's when I started hearing all these remarkable stories, and I started to collect every single one I could.
Could the transplanted heart be bringing with it some kind of information from its previous owner? We know that the heart is a hugely energetic organ and is in constant communication with the brain. 40,000 neurons, or nerve cells in the heart, communicate up to the brain. Hormones from the heart travel in our bloodstream, and every time the heart beats, it creates a pulse wave. But most impressive of all is our heart's magnetic energy, 5,000 times more powerful than the brain. It can be measured up to 6 feet away from our bodies.
I thought, this heart is just as powerful, more powerful, and does talk to the brain. Maybe we should be paying attention to that. Maybe the brain, even though it thinks it's us, isn't.
Professor Pearsall was sure that the energy of the heart and its relationship with the brain was the key. And as more and more transplant patients came up with these remarkable experiences, it seemed to confirm it. But could his hunch stand up to science? In the last 40 years, we have developed the ability to transplant a heart from one body to another. In that time, intriguing experiences have emerged from recipients who felt their personality had changed after their transplant. It was enough to prompt some scientists to look differently at the heart and test old theories, that the heart is involved in our feelings and emotions.
The heart is a connective organ, a gentle organ. It's a different type of intelligence. I don't know all about its intelligence. That's what we need to learn. And how we learn that is by asking openly questions about people's hearts, not dismissing them as poetry, that metaphor. Say, maybe there's something to this.
Professor Pearsall collated his research into a book called The Heart's Code. In it, he explored these stories about organ transplant patients and what they reveal about where we store our memories. Simultaneously, on the opposite side of America, Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry from Yale University, Gary Schwartz, was developing a new theory of how memory could work.
I was studying how feedback mechanisms are involved in learning. When we talk, for example, about how the brain learns, we talk about what are called neural networks in the brain. It turns out that the way a neural network works is that the output of the neurons feed back to the input of the neurons. And this process goes over and over again. And so long as the feedback is present, the neurons will learn. If you cut the feedback, there is no learning in the neurons. And the implication is that it's important for the neurons to have the feedback in order for the learning to take place. Well, by extension, any system that has feedback is going to therefore learn. I mean, we learn to shoot baskets, for example, in basketball by getting feedback about whether we're accurate or not. We learn to speak by getting feedback about whether we're accurate or not. And so consequently, any system, any set of cells that has feedback mechanisms in a network is going to learn the same way that neurons learn. And that's what's called feedback memory or systemic memory.
He applied his theory of feedback memory to the heart and predicted that information could be transferred through organs in transplant surgery. At around the same time, cases like Claire Sylvia hit the headlines. And Professor Pearsall published numerous similar stories from transplant patients. The two men realized their common ground and got in touch with each other.
We spoke to each other on the telephone, and as I began to hear more details about the cases, I began to realize that this was a theoretical prediction that could actually be verified in the biomedical world. I told Paul that I felt it was very important that some of his best cases be looked at very carefully and that they be published in a journal article.
I collected and did the interviews and did the transcripts and the analysis of the transcripts and had got all the transcripts together and then sent them to Dr. Schwartz.
They had to trace and interview not only the heart recipients, but also the donor families. What they were looking for were parallels between donor and recipient in their preferences, memories, and tastes.
I independently examined those cases, had them blindly looked at by other individuals, and then wrote a formal research report describing those cases and giving the kinds of examples of data that are sort of irrefutable.
Out of the original 70 cases that felt a change, they ended up with 10 whose new personality and memories matched those of their donor.
If you look at the content carefully, you will discover that the degree of coincidence is too detailed. For example, there's a case that we describe of a man 47 years old, and he received the heart of a 17-year-old black young man. And he was not racist, but he had a lot of biases about what he expected of young black men, including the fact that if he was going to pick up anything from them, he would be afraid, for example, that he might be picking up rap music. However, after he received the transplant, of the various changes that he experienced is he had a profound change in his preference for music. He became obsessed with classical music. He began listening to it over and over. He began singing melodies, classical melodies to songs he hadn't heard. His wife was thoroughly confused. Only later was it learned that the young boy was actually leaving his violin lessons because he was a classical violinist, and he was hit by a car. That kind of information is not the kind of information that you just get with a random assortment of fears or changes in simple preferences.
The stories they were collecting seemed to contain remarkable parallels. It seemed to Schwartz that the information relayed by the recipient could only have come from their new heart.
To the extent that the heart is serving as a circulating feedback storage system for core central memories in the body, then if that heart is taken out and placed in another body, those core central memories, which are circulating within the heart, in its cellular and neural feedback loops, would continue and be passed on in the new person.
Faced with these new feelings after their transplant, some patients could only look to their donors for an explanation.
After my transplant, I had wanted to know who my donor was right away. You know, when you have somebody that is keeping you alive, you know, you want to know who this person is.
Just would love to know how this person was, what he was like, deep down, inside out, whether it be good, whether it be...
I think the majority of us want to know because you've got such an important part in your body. You want to know where it's come from.
I am waiting to find out a little bit about my donor because he did give me the gift of life, and you couldn't ask for that no more than even winning the lottery than the gift of life.
Jim is one of those patients who experienced an extraordinary change directly after his operation 5 years ago. His wife Maggie also noticed it straight away.
He just surprised everybody. I could see the difference in him, the difference in his eyes, the sparkle come back, and he just seemed completely different.
Like, I left school when I was 15. I was a coalman and then a lorry driver, and so I didn't have a very good education, but I learnt myself how to write, and I'm not very good at spelling. So it was a surprise to me that 6 months after my transplant, I just sat down one morning and just scribbled something down, and then that led to many poems and me book what I'm writing. I just was writing and writing and writing, and that's how it came about, like, you know, and I don't know where it come from, to be honest with you, because like I say, I've never done anything like this before. I'm sending you 1,000 kisses.
Before his transplant, Jim had no creative talent for writing and very little time for sentimentality.
Never ever wrote anything before in my life. Never even sent her a love letter in 42 years. Have I?
Oh.
Well, I have your girlfriend.
After Jim had already started writing poetry, he received a letter from the donor family, which contained lines of verse. The coincidence was too much for Jim, and now he is curious.
Eventually, when I do meet Martin's family, I'm going to feel like a part of his family, and hopefully they will think that I'm a part of their family. Don't think of him as being dead. Think of him resting me instead, for I will do my utmost best until we're both in arms at rest.
For many recipients, this gift of life generates feelings of both gratitude and guilt because of the circumstances that lie behind where their heart came from. In a transplant, the heart's journey starts with a donor and an event that is always born out of unforeseen tragedy. For them too, it is important to follow their heart.
Today it's 5 years since my son Kyle was killed. Obviously it's a very sad day for me, and I take flowers over there and have a little chat, and I usually write a little letter to him, just telling him, keeping him informed about the rest of the family. I have a letter for you, babe. My darling Kyle, another year has passed now. He's 5. It's still hard to come to terms with you no longer being here. I still hear your voice and long for you to be back with us. I still feel your presence. Shane and Claire are engaged.
Today, I'm going to be showing you some of the tactics in bait presentation and technique in how to catch a living nippers roach.
He was a laughing, joking boy, a happy boy, always a smile on his face.
Just like when you drop it.
Janice has 4 sons. One night in February 5 years ago, her second son, Kyle, sustained terrible head injuries in a car accident. Despite efforts to revive him, he was eventually pronounced brain dead.
As your last words to me were, I love you, Mum. Mum, I love you, son. God bless till we are together again, never to be parted. Your ever-loving Mum. There we are, and that's from the heart, Kyle. The hardest part of me is missing. You can never ever get that back. You can learn to live with the pain of losing your loved ones. You never ever get it back completely, you know. There's always there's an empty place at the table. Clean.
Now, Janice has to do one last thing for her son.
One day I said, I'm gonna put my hand on your heart again and I'm gonna feel that beat. I promise you, and you know, I never break my promises. And that is something that has been keeping me going for so long.
Because of strict confidentiality regulations around a transplant, the only thing Janice knew was that her son's heart and lungs had been donated to a boy named Daniel.
I want to feel that heart beating again. I want to put my hand on his heart, on that heart, and feel that bump, and it's going to be a connection between me and Kyle. I know that Kyle isn't here with us anymore, and I know that that's Dan's heart now, but there's still Kyle in that heart, okay? So if they mean that there's Kyle in that heart, then he's still got me in there as well.
Now Janice is finally going to fulfill her promise. She has set a date to meet Daniel. For many like Janice, the heart is symbolic in our emotions. Now, scientists in California are testing to see whether this symbolism is true. Discovery of brain cells in the heart has brought with it new ideas about memory and intelligence. Scientists have been searching for an explanation for an extraordinary phenomenon in which memories and tastes seem to have been transplanted along with the human heart. Many heart surgeons believe it's psychological.
Suddenly he or she finds themselves so much better, but also having to adapt to a new life, and they tend almost naturally to link it to the donor, and you can come up with many ideas. Not all of them are necessarily true.
Having a heart transplant is trauma, and it's been a whole set of environmental experiences being in an intensive care unit. The second thing is immunosuppressive medications, some of which have other effects, psychological effects, mood swings, euphoria sometimes, strange thought patterns.
And yet the level of coincidence in some stories of memory transplants are compelling, difficult to explain away. Some scientists now think they've found a system of neurons in the heart that challenges the orthodox view of the brain.
Until the recent past, science has glorified the brain. The questions we should be asking as scientists is that the only place these things happen? When we just know about the heart and its remarkable energy and its connections with the brain and its neurons and its hormones, if we know that, shouldn't we be asking and here comes the key scientific question, is there another source of intelligence? Is there another way to think? Not instead, but also. The question isn't either or. The question is and. And if we only glorify the brain, we'll never be open to the possibility that another organ thinks.
Researchers at the Institute of Heart Math in California are investigating the possibility that the heart could actually have its own unique intelligence. Dr. Roland McCraty and his colleagues have developed experiments to see whether the metaphors of the heart could stand up to scientific scrutiny.
I first heard of Paul Pearsall when I think he contacted me in terms of exploring possible mechanisms that might explain the phenomena of a heart transplant recipient taking on some of the personality characteristics of the person that they got the heart from. He had interviewed quite a number of patients that had this experience, and there's enough of this that I think we have to take it seriously, that there is something going on here.
Dr. McCraty's research is controversial, but he found support in evidence provided by a neurologist, Dr. Andrew Amour from Montreal in Canada. After many years treating patients with heart disease, he observed there was more to the heart than the current scientific model could explain.
In those days, in the 60s, there was no consideration of the nervous system. The heart was just a pump. And the reason is because people have not had the facility to see the heart in any other form. You look at it and it's a pump, right? And my own bias is that in the last 50 years or so, we have developed the ability with all the electronics to record more than just the muscle on the heart, but the neurons on the heart.
As he looked closer, he noticed something remarkable.
I started to record outside the heart and found neurons that no one had expected before. And I thought, gee, that's sort of nice. I wonder if that could be on the heart, right? So from there, and having developed techniques that I felt good about, I put them on the heart and bingo, they worked.
He had discovered a sophisticated collection of neurons in the heart. According to him, they were organized into a small but complex nervous system. He called it the little brain in the heart. Suddenly, our traditional views on the brain and intelligence were being challenged. If the heart had brain cells, could it have its own unique type of intelligence? The researchers at Heart Math believe so. They call it heart intelligence.
The heart itself has a quite complex nervous system, and all the types of neurons and the way they're wired together to be able to say that the heart has a functional brain. And Dr. Armour has pictures of it. I mean, there's definitely a little brain in the heart. And the types of neurons that are in the little brain in the heart have also been demonstrated to have both short and long-term memory using the same type of techniques that you use to show that neurons in the brain exhibit memory.
This little collection of neurons can retain input function for a little while. So if your heart beats, puts it in, this little guy is still oscillating. So the last cardiac cycle could set up a number of future cardiac cycles. That's memory.
Once a heart is removed from the donor, it is cooled and can stay alive for up to 4 hours.
Hearts in the room. Thank you.
Only when the heart is perfused with blood from its new owner does it spontaneously start beating again. It is thought that this internal nervous system, or brain in the heart, is what allows a heart transplant to work. McCraty goes further.
Certainly the function of the heart itself have got to be transplanted and go along. When you think of the heart, it's a very complex organ. All the coordination that has to happen within the heart for it to pump efficiently, and it really can't function properly and efficiently without the neural system in the heart. That's very clear. So those types of functions have got to get transplanted, and there's certain types of memory there that the heart has to remember what it did last beat or a few beats ago to be able to function properly now.
Boy, the heart started beating right away, didn't it? Pretty nice.
If the heart has a nervous system and a type of memory needed for its efficient function, could higher level memories also be stored and transferred? And what would this tell us about where our memory resides?
Memory itself is what's called distributed process. And this has been known for many hundred years now, that you can't localize memory to a neuron or a group of neurons. The memory itself is distributed throughout the neural system. So why do we have to draw a line at the throat and say that memory is only distributed from here to here? Why couldn't it be distributed throughout the whole neural system?
And if memory is distributed throughout the nervous system, including organs like the heart, what would this mean for transplant recipients?
When you put a heart into a transplant, we could potentially retrieve some of those memories that were distributed throughout the whole system. I'm certainly not saying that is the explanation, but it's plausible that could be what's going on.
Some heart transplant recipients feel a change so profound they are battling with a complete transformation. Bill Wohl from Phoenix, Arizona, had a heart transplant 5 years ago. His change after the operation was dramatic.
I couldn't have been luckier because I got a fantastic donor, someone super healthy, handsome leading man, good looks, and the fun began.
Bill felt he was being driven by a completely new personality. Previously a successful and hard-working businessman, he put his career aside and began a new life. Dr. Jack Copeland was his transplant surgeon.
Within months, the man was transformed into an athlete. We have very little idea that this was going to happen to him, but it did. He started cycling, he started working out, he started swimming.
Just months after his operation, Bill began training excessively. But it wasn't until a full year later, when he met his donor family, that he found out that he had developed remarkable parallels to his donor.
I know on certain things that I had no interest or whatever in before. It had to come from somewhere, and it makes sense to me, and I truly believe that it came from my donor.
Brady, Bill's donor, was a Hollywood stuntman. It was only when Bill met his donor family that his new interests seemed to make sense. He is convinced that he has inherited many personality traits through his donor's heart.
What a great picture of Brady. He was really a handsome man. Unbelievable. Even though part of him is with me all the time, I guess I'm never going to have that luxury of meeting him, and this is why I want to know and learn so much about him. I guess the analogy, I don't know where Brady stops and I start, but we've both wrapped our lives into pushing ourselves into performance.
Today, Chris, Brady's brother, is flying in from San Diego to see Bill. It is always an important meeting for them, and this time they are planning a 5-year commemoration to Brady.
The first time was a year after my brother's accident. A number of us convened in Tombstone for a memorial, and Bill was kind enough to come join us for that. And believe it or not, I brought a stethoscope with me.
And he asked me if I wouldn't mind if he could listen to Brady's heart, because he wanted to connect with his brother. You know, it was a very special moment. I knew how important it was to him, and we just did it.
Well, I just thought it would be neat to hear my brother's heart beating in another man.
Meeting Chris and having the opportunity to find out more about Brady, his donor, just confirms to Bill that his profound personality change came with his heart.
What's up, Don?
How you doing?
How you doing, buddy?
How you feel? Good, how are you?
Good, you look good.
Occasionally work out.
I think it's phenomenal to see that he's been able to not only receive a heart that works for him, but be able to push it and get the most from it and be a successful transplant athlete is really inspiring. And you know, it makes the gift of my brother's heart donation that much more valuable because he's making the most of the opportunity.
Well, I think that Bill's idea that he acquired some of his new personality from a donor is, you know, that's his idea. I respect it. I can't say that he's crazy or definitely wrong, but on the other hand, as a surgeon and a physician, I can't really accept that as a valid interpretation without some kind of proof.
The researchers at the Institute of Heart Math set out to design an experiment to investigate the heart's role in processing emotional information.
What we found was that the heart is by far the most accurate part of our body that reflects how we're feeling. Our heart is literally beating out different messages that is strongly correlated with our emotional state. It's a scientific fact, even though a lot of people don't know this, that the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart.
It's very important to understand the relationship between the brain and the heart because this ultimately helps us understand how the heart can have memories related to the brain. The brain and the heart are interconnected by multiple sources of information. First of all, there's neural connection from the brain to the heart. There's also humoral connections. Okay, hormones will go from the brain to the heart. The heart, in turn, of course, sends feedback back to the brain through pressure receptors and through literally the blood going back. But then what's often not recognized is that the heart is the largest generator of electromagnetic signals in the body. In fact, the EKG is 10, 100 times even larger than the EEG of the brain. And the electrical signal from the heart travels through the bloodstream to the brain. And of course, the brain's electrical signal travels back to the heart. So consequently, these two are sharing their interactions, even electromagnetically, with each other.
It's like a radio transmitter works. The heart radiates very strong fields, and the heart is the strongest rhythmic source of electromagnetic fields in the body. And with today's equipment, we can measure the magnetic field of the heart 6 feet away from the body. Probably it goes farther, but that's the sensitivity of the equipment we have now.
They began investigating the heart's role in our experience of feeling and emotion.
Some of our more recent research, where we're looking at I call it the electrophysiology of intuition, are indicating that the heart really is connected to some other, I call it field of information.
In the experiment, subjects were shown photographs chosen to cause extreme emotions. both positive and negative. They were selected at 6-second intervals at random. They recorded the physiology of brain and heart activity.
What we found is in that what we call pre-stimulus period, before they saw the photograph, that both the heart and the brain would react differently. That the heart was shifting, was changing, before the brain was.
According to McCraty, the experiment shows that the heart is behaving intuitively. Remarkably, the heart registers an anticipatory response before a disturbing image appears on screen and sends a message directly to the emotional centers of the brain. The brain then prepares the body to take action.
This was even a surprise to us, that the heart was plugged into this type of information even before the brain.
Where all this leads, according to McCraty, is to a suggestion that the brain doesn't have an exclusive role in information processing.
It's quite plausible then that if we transplant a heart from one person to another, that transplanted heart is connected to that field of information from the person that they got that heart from. And it feels like there's somebody else inside them.
McCraty's theories are not accepted by mainstream medicine. But patients like Claire Sylvia are still searching for an explanation for what they feel.
Having had this experience of living with the presence of another has run the gamut of emotions. I've changed so much. The old parts of Claire with the new parts of Tim have become joined and become like a third being.
After my surgery, I always felt like I was taking care of somebody else. I always felt, and I told my donor mother this, I said, I'm living for two.
I carry conversations on with him, and I say things to him almost every day.
I don't ever feel alone. You know, I always feel like I have him with me, and that's kind of good to know.
In order for recipients to understand where these extraordinary new feelings come from, they must retrace the journey of their heart. For questions to be resolved, both recipient and donor family have to meet, and Janice is about to do just that. Janice is about to meet Daniel, the recipient of her son Kyle's heart.
I'm just looking so forward to it. Really, really am. You know, the end of 5 years of aching just to meet this boy and just put my hand and feel that bump, bump, bump.
A year after the transplant, Janice received an email from Daniel.
Hello, Janice. It's very difficult for me to know what words to use. I feel hugely for your loss and grateful beyond words. To tell you a little about my situation before the transplant, I've been waiting for over a year.
I would be pleased to meet you and wish to ease your suffering in any way I can, although I'm quite a shy person, so please be gentle with me. Forever grateful, Dan.
Daniel was born with cystic fibrosis, an inherited lung disease. The lungs are easily infected and breathing is difficult. Daniel's life expectancy was not good.
When I was 21, my health started to deteriorate. The speed of the deterioration increased quite rapidly, and I'm pretty certain that I was about 2 months away from dying when I actually got the call. This call came. I knew that I was pretty close to death, so this was it.
Janice is still coming to terms with what happened to her son's heart.
That heart is the same heart that beat inside me when I was having him. And his heart is the most important organ to me. Yeah, it's his heart. It's his life, isn't it? You know, the heart stops beating and everything else stops with it.
Janice's 5-year wait is finally over. She is about to meet Daniel and his mother for the first time.
Hi, Dan.
All right. Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. It means so much to me, it really does.
Hello,
Thank you
Jan.
very much. Thank you.
You've no idea how much this means to us.
I do. Honestly,
Thank
I
you.
do. Yeah. Come on. Come in. Sit down, have a cup of tea. So how are you keeping?
Oh, exceptionally well. So good.
Carl was dark like you, dark-haired.
Was he?
Yep. I'll show you a picture of him, because I was always wondered if you knew what he looked like. That is Kyle.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not. It's more olive-skinned. Look, he's more olive-skinned. That was when he loved animals.
Oh,
he loved animals.
Handsome.
Yes, he was a very good-looking boy.
A really
Carl was the one that started this all off, my son, you know. And I love him and I miss him terribly, but I've felt that little old beat of his heart. It's not as strong as what it was because it's through 2 layers of clothing, but it's still beating on. And that is what I've been waiting for 5 years. And I am so pleased that I've met you. I really am so pleased that I've met you. That I can put a face to this mystery person, you know. And Carl's not gone completely. I know it's not Carl's heart anymore, but he's still got part of me in that heart.
Yes,
and it's still going on.
Yeah.
You know, and hopefully you'll go on and on and on
Absolutely.
and on.
He's
and
living a life now that we would never have thought possible, even when you were born, really, would we, darling?
No, I'm doing things now that are just, I just didn't even consider. It was like
rock climbing.
And
Now, do you know, that's really good, because Carl was a bit adventurous like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, he wanted to be a paratrooper.
But could this new adventurous spirit in Dan possibly have come from his donor's heart?
my life changed after the transplant, just so completely and utterly. I started doing all those really sporty things that I just wasn't able to do before. In all honesty, sports for me when I was a kid wasn't something that overly interested me, so it was never really an issue, the fact that I wasn't able to do sports. If there was some evidence that was shown to me that irrevocably proved that some of my emotions could have been drawn from my donor, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest, so I just consider that it is now just my emotions now.
Presently, research shows a personality change reported in 5 to 10% of heart transplant recipients.
So whenever you come with a wild idea, if you like, it needs to be refuted. And if we can't refute it, maybe there is something there.
The information that exists in a human being is transferred from one to another in this solid organ. So it's, you know, certainly the possibility is there.
With new evidence that an organ like the heart could have its own unique type of intelligence, we are moving towards an understanding of how the heart, in collaboration with the brain, has a role to play in interpreting the world around us.
The heart may be, based on current science, a sentient, thinking, feeling, remembering organ. That's the story. The transplant patients are some of the data. If that's true, then we ask the question, have we been thinking without a heart for all these years, or at least not as much with it as we should? If that's the case, we better wake up and have a heart.
And for those that experience this phenomena firsthand, it is important to take it seriously.
I don't think it's just a pump. It's part and parcel of me, like the rest of my body. And one day I will learn to accept it.
I honestly don't care what people think. I know in my heart of hearts that what happens is what happens.
I'm living with a part of him. I'm living for him, and I'm living for myself through him.
I know in our heart that these are things that I didn't do before and have just become my normal everyday things.
I know it's easy for me to sit here and say this, but, you know, I've changed as a person. Oh, I ain't cold.
One day, Jim and Maggie hope to find out if this new poetic and romantic Jim has come out of the blue or from his donor.
He's put like we're twins, we feel the same pain and this, that and the other, like,
It's
you
like
know.
2 roses in a flower bed, aren't we?
Yeah, two roses in a flower bed, yeah.
Oh.
Mindshock is back next Wednesday with Sex on the Brain. Details of that one coming up in a second. Tonight, from being a mistress of sin to an unlikely national treasure, Sex in the 80s, Madam Sin's home movies, up next.